بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We will inshallah first recite from the text and thereafter we will explain. حافظ ابن حجر raḥimahullāh says: أما بعد فإن التصانيف في اصطلاح أهل الحديث قد كثرت للأئمة في القديم والحديث، فمن أول من صنف في ذلك القاضي أبو محمد الرامهرمزي في كتابه المحدث الفاصل، لكنه لم يستوعب. After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and passing salutations upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the author now officially commences with the introduction to the book. He says, أما بعد. With regards to these words, the word amma is a shart and ba'd is a dharf that is also in place of a shart. The word ba'd will always be with a dhamma. It is mabni on a dhamma because the mudaf ilay is not mentioned but it is intended. Understand it to have the meaning of ba'da ma dhukira, after all that is mentioned. These are common words which the Arabs use to separate and differentiate one topic from another. They are also commonly used to separate the khutbah or the introduction from the actual book. There are differences regarding the first person to use these words. Some take it as far back to Adam alayhi salam. Others are of the opinion that Dawood alayhi salam was the very first. There are other views as well. A poet offered 5 different opinions. جرى الخلف أما بعد من كان بادئا بها 5 أقوال وداود أقرب وكانت له فصل الخطاب وبعده فقصف صحبان فكعب فيعرب. And others have added to this poem ويعقوب أيوب الصبور وآدم. Hence, there are 8 different opinions on who could have been the first to use these words. Some say it's Adam alayhi salam. Others are of the opinion that it was Dawood alayhi salam. The poet prefers that it was him. Some claim that it was Yaqub alayhi salam. Others mention that it was Ayyub alayhi salam. Then there are those who says that it was Qus ibn Sa'ida, or Sahban ibn Wa'il, or Ka'b ibn Zuhair, or Ya'rub ibn Qahtan. One of these 8 was the first to use these words. The Prophet ﷺ also used these words, as is established from around 30 narrations. Imam Bukhari raḥimahullah brought a dedicated chapter for this. باب من قال في الخطبة بعد الثناء أما بعد. رواه عكرمة عن ابن عباس عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. Sheikh Ismail al-Jawhari wrote an entire book on these words. The title is إحراز السعد بإنجاز الوعد بمسائل أما بعد. This book has been published by numerous different publishers, and you may refer to this book for more details on these words. Hafidh ibn Hajar raḥimahullah commences by discussing the literature on Ulūm al Ḥadīth before him. He says, فَإِنَّ التَّصَانِيفَ فِي اصْطِلَاحِ أَهْلِ الْحَدِيثِ. He brings the word tasanif. The word tasanif is the plural of the word tasnif, which is derived from the word sinf, which means to distinguish. Allama Munawi rahimahullah said, التصنيف تمييز الأشياء بعضها عن بعض ومنه تصنيف الكتب. It is to differentiate some things from others, and from here you get the words tasniful kutub. So it is as if an author is gathering his thoughts and presenting them to the reader. With regards to the words istilah, Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah explains istilah as توافقهم على استعمال ألفاظ مخصوصة يتداولونها على وجه التعارف فيما بينهم كما اصطلحوا عليها. It refers to the nomenclature, technical terms, and specific terminology that a particular group of people agree to use amongst themselves. Regarding the books on these terminologies, he says, قَدْ كَثُرَتْ لِلْأَئِمَّةِ. The word a'imma is the plural of the word imam. It is derived from the word amma, which refers to something being in front. Ulūm al Ḥadīth raḥimahullah explained جمع إمام من أمك إذا صار إمامك أي إذا صار أمامك أي متقدما عليك بحق أو بباطل إنسان كان أو كتابا مثلا. That it is the plural of the word imam derived from the word ammaka if something is in front of you. So whether it is someone or whether it is something. So if it is a person, then whether he is leading with truth or with falsehood, and it could also be an object like a book, etc. Fil qadimi wal hadith. He is saying that lots of books have been written in the distant past and even quite recently. After mentioning that there were many books, the author will now discuss some of the main books. He says, فَمِنْ أَوَّلِ مَنْ صَنَّفَ فِي ذَلِكَ. Hafiz ibn Ḥajar raḥimahullah is acknowledging that there were numerous books already written on the topic that he intends to write on. He analyzes some of the most important and very popular books to determine whether there is a need to write more or if we can suffice with these earlier books. So he just mentioned that there were many books written. Since there was such a large amount of literature, he does not discuss all, but he gives an overview of the main books and then mentions why he had to write and what his contributions will be, so that from the very outset the reader will know what benefit he will get by reading this book after reading the earlier books. So he says, فَمِنْ أَوَّلِ مَنْ صَنَّفَ. He uses the word min. It is essential to take into consideration this word min. He used the word min to show that the person whose name he is going to take was from amongst the first. So we will come back to this point. فَمِنْ أَوَّلِ مَنْ صَنَّفَ فِي ذَلِكَ الْقَاضِي أَبُو مُحَمَّدٍ الرَّاحِمَهُllāh فِي كِتَابِهِ. Ulama raḥimahullāh rahimahullah, his name is Hasan ibn Abd al-Rahman al-Khallad. He is attributed to the area from which he came, which is still today called Ramahurmuz and pronounced in English as Ramhormuz. This is a city in present-day Iran. It is said that Salman al-Farsi radiyallahu anhu also hailed from this very locality. Ulūm al Ḥadīth rahimahullah says, قِيلَ مِنْهَا سَلْمَانُ الْفَارسِي الصَّحَابِي. Now, to determine whether Ulama rahimahullah was indeed the absolute first to write in this field, or if there were scholars who wrote books before him, it is important to note and remember his date of birth and his date of demise, so that you can compare it with that of others. Ulama rahimahullah was born in the year 260 Hijri and he passed away in the year 360 Hijri. He lived for exactly 100 years. You know, this is exactly like another famous scholar of Hadith, Imam Tabarani rahimahullah. He too was born in the same year as Ulama rahimahullah in 260 Hijri. And he also passed away in the exact same year as Ulama rahimahullah in 360 Hijri. Hence, both of them completed a full century. The point to bear in mind is that Ulama rahimahullah lived from the mid 3rd century to the 4th century. Which book is Hafiz ibn Ḥajar rahimahullah referring to? He says, في كتابه المحدث الفاصل. This is a portion of the name of the book. The full name is المحدث الفاصل بين الراوي والواعي. Hafiz ibn Ḥajar rahimahullah mentioned the name with a sword. In all the printed copies too, it comes with the word fasil with a sword. However, many manuscripts have a dad. Ulūm al Ḥadīth rahimahullah says, وضبط بعضهم الفاصل بالصاد المهملة وتمام الاسم يدل على صحة ضبطه وكثير من النسخ يعجم فيه ضاده وهو المشهور على الألسنة. So in his time, probably it was more commonly known with a dad. It was probably commonly pronounced with a dad, al-Muhaddith al-Fadil, but thereafter it became now very famously known as al-Muhaddith al-Fasil. It was first printed with the research of Muhammad Ajaj al-Khatib. It was printed by Dar al-Fikr. This print is in 678 pages. This is the copy that I have. Then it was also printed by an-Nashir al-Mutamayyiz with the research of Abu Humam al-Baydawi in 821 pages. It was also printed with the research of Muhammad Muhibbuddin Abu Zayd in 800 pages and published by Dar al-Zakhair, and Tariq ibn Iwadullah wrote the foreword for that print. By mentioning all the prints and also in light of all that we explained previously about the prints of Nuzha an-Naḍar and the manuscripts that were used, I trust that you will learn the importance of studying which print to get before purchasing any book. Now let us revert to that point on whether Allama Ramah Hurmuzi was indeed the first or just amongst the first. For this we need to explore the era before Allama Ramah Hurmuzi raḥimahullāh. Before Allama Ramah Hurmuzi raḥimahullāh, scholars would mention a principle or two in passing. For example, Ibn al-Awn rahimahullah, who passed away in the year 150 Hijri, he said, لا يؤخذ هذا العلم إلا ممن شهد له بالطلب. You can only take this knowledge from a person whose scholars testify that he exerted himself in seeking knowledge. So he mentioned this one principle in passing. Likewise, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah insisted that a person should remember the narration at any time, from the time he heard or memorized the narration until the time he conveyed the narration. The narrator should be able to recall the narration at any time. It should be at the tip of his tongue. Ibn Abil Awam rahimahullah quotes with his chain in his book Fadail Abi Hanifa, which by the way is the best book on the virtues of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. So he brings his sanad to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. لا ينبغي للرجل أن يحدث من الحديث إلا ما يحفظه من يوم سمعه إلى يوم يحدث به. This is in Fadail Abi Hanifa on page 125. It is not permissible for a person to quote a narration unless he could recall the narration at any time, from the time he heard it until the time he narrates it. In this way, many scholars would mention a principle or two like this. Actually, this book of Allama Ramah Hurmuzi rahimahullah is all about gathering the principles, the views, and the rulings of earlier scholars. Allama Ramah Hurmuzi rahimahullah brings his chain to a particular scholar and then quotes the principle which he mentioned. He then grouped similar principles together and put them under one chapter. Then there were scholars who would dedicate a chapter or two on a few principles. Probably Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah was the first to do this. Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda rahimahullah says, ويمكن أن يقال أن الإمام الشافعي رضي الله عنه هو أول من دون بعض المباحث الحديثية في كتابه الرسالة. It is probable to say that Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah was the first to document a few principles in his book Ar-Risala. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah also added few chapters like these in his Tarikh al-Kabir and even in his Sahih. Imam Muslim rahimahullah also wrote various principles in the introduction to his Sahih. Likewise, Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah gathered so many different principles in his different books. In fact, his ilal is indispensable for advancing in the science. We also have what is known as suwalat, where students would question their teachers and would then write all the queries with the responses. For example, a suwalat ibn Junayd of Yahya ibn Ma'in that was printed in 2006 by Maktab Dar in 597 pages, or Suwalat li Abi Bakr al-Athram, questions which he asked Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahimahullah. This also printed, and there were many others which were also printed. So there are many principles which are revealed in the answers. Many times we also learn how different terms were used based on how teachers used these terms in their responses. But the main scholar who actually wrote a lot on the subject was Ali ibn al-Madini raḥimahullāh, who lived between 161 Hijri and passed away in 234 Hijri. He was one of the main teachers of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. Imam Bukhari rahimahullah said, "Mastasghartu nafsi inda ahadin illa inda Ali ibn al-Madini." This is in Al-Kamil fi Du'afa al-Rijal in volume 1 on page 120. I never had an inferiority complex in front of any teacher like what I had in front of Ali ibn al-Madini. For every other teacher, Imam Bukhari rahimahullah knew that he can learn more than the teacher and he could surpass the teacher. But Ali ibn al-Madini rahimahullah was so advanced that even a professional and expert like Imam Bukhari rahimahullah felt incompetent in front of him. So you can imagine the caliber and status of Ali ibn al-Madini rahimahullah. He wrote on numerous different topics of Ulūm al Ḥadīth. Imam al-Hakim rahimahullah says in his Ma'rifah Ulūm al Ḥadīth, سمعت الشريف القاضي أبا الحسن محمد بن صالح الحاشمي قاضي القضاة يقول: هذه أسامي مصنفات علي بن المديني. كتاب الأسامي والكنى 8 أجزاء. كتاب الضعفاء 10 أجزاء. So you can see mentioning the book's name and in how many volumes it was. His Asami wal Kuna was in 8 volumes. ضعفاء 10 volumes. كتاب المدلسين 5 أجزاء. كتاب أول من نظر في الرجال وفحص عنهم جزء كتاب الطبقات 10 أجزاء. Like this here he brings a whole list of books. After mentioning this entire list, Imam Hakim rahimahullah says, إنما اقتصرنا على فهرسة مصنفاته في هذا الموضع يستدل به على تبحره وتقدمه وكماله. We just presented these few titles so that you can get an idea of how advanced and what an expert he was in this field. Imam Nawawi rahimahullah quotes from Allama Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah that he wrote more than 200 different books. Ali ibn al-Madini wrote more than 200 different books. In Tahdhib al-Tahdhib it comes, وقال الشيخ محي الدين النووي نقلا من جامع الخطيب صنف علي بن المديني في الحديث 200 مصنف. After mentioning the names of some of these books, Allama Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah said, وَجَمِيعُ هَذِهِ الْكُتُبِ قَدْ انْقَرَضَتْ وَلَمْ نَقِفْ عَلَى شَيْءٍ مِّنْهَا إِلَّا عَلَى 4 أو 5 حسب. He mentions that these books are no more in circulation. They are, so to say, extinct. You can imagine at the time when Allama Khatib rahimahullah was mentioning this. This was hardly even 200 years after Ali ibn al-Madini rahimahullah. So he mentioned that there are only 4 or 5 books which remained. Thereafter he says, وَلَا عُمْرِي إِنَّ فِي انْقِرَاضِهَا ذَهَابُ عُلُومٍ جُمَّةٍ وَانْقِطَاعِ فَوَائِدٍ ضَخْمَةٍ وَكَانَ عَلِيُّ بْنُ الْمَدِينِ فيلسوف هذه الصنعة وطبيبها ولسان طائفة الحديث وخطيبها رحمة الله عليه وأكرم مثواه لديه. Since Ali ibn al-Madini wrote all these, Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda rahimullah regards him as the absolute first who wrote on Ulūm al Ḥadīth independently. On page 8 of the introduction of Lamahat min Ta'rikh al-Sunnah wa Ulūmiha, he says, ويقدر أن أقدم من ألف في مباحثه مستقلا الإمام علي بن المديني. So in the introduction he said that it could be estimated يقدر. However, on page 201 of the same book he mentions with conviction وفي أواخر القرن الثاني بدأ بالتأليف بعض المباحث منه على شكل أبواب مستقلة في موضوعها يجمع الموضوع الواحد منها. Or he said يجمع الموضوع الواحد منها جزء أو أجزاء تكون كتابا لطيفا بمقاييسنا اليوم. وأقدم من يمكن إضافة ذلك إليه في علم الضعيف هو الإمام علي بن المديني. So this is with regards to Ali ibn al-Madini. Imam al-Humaydi rahimahullah, another teacher of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, he also wrote a treatise called Risala fi Ilm al-Mustalah. There were many others who wrote in one subject of Ulūm al Ḥadīth. For example, some wrote on ilal, the hidden defects, while others wrote on al-jarh wa ta'dil, regarding the scrutiny of narrators. From all this, we realize that Hafiz ibn Ḥajar raḥimahullah purposefully used the word min, because he knew well that Allāmah Rāma-Hurmuzi raḥimahullah was not the absolute first, but definitely he was amongst the pioneers. Many scholars highlighted this crucial point. Mullah al-Qari rahimahullah said, وَفِي الْكَلَامِ إِشْعَارٌ بِوُجُودِ تَعَدُّدِ التَّصْنِيفِ فِي قَرْنِ الْقَاضِ وَعَدَمِ تَحَقُّقِ الْأَوَّلِيَّةِ وَبَيَانُهُ أَنَّ مِنْ لِلتَّبْعِيضِ وأول اسم التفضيل بمعنى الجماعة. Likewise, Allāmah al-Qani rahimahullah said, وَأَفَادَ فَمِنْ عَدَمُ انْحِصَارِ الْأَوَّلِيَّةِ فِي مَنْ ذُكِرَ. Shaykh Nuruddin Itr stresses on this with lot of emphasis, and he expresses astonishment on those who quote the author as claiming that Allāmah Rāma-Hurmuzi rahimahullah was the first. He says غير مدقق. You can see here in the footnotes, he says غير مدقق وقد صرف الحافظ ابن حجر بأنه من أول التصنيف. فالعجب ممن يرى هذا الكلام الصريح ويقول الرامة-هرمزي أول من صنف. However, in some copies of Tadrib al-Rawi, it seems like Allāmah Suyuti rahimahullah declared in a general way with itlaq that Allāmah Rāma-Hurmuzi was the first. He said, أول من صنف. So he did not use the word min. He said, أول من صنف, the first to write. Shaykh Rahili, he mentions in his footnotes, عبارة المؤلف هنا فمن أول من صنف في ذلك وفي تدريب الراوي للسيوطي نقلا عن المصنف أول من صنف. So Allāmah Suyuti rahimahullah is quoting Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, and he drops off the word min. He says, so then Shaykh Rahili says, وكأن من سقطت خطأ في أثناء النقل والنسخ. He says that perhaps the word min was dropped accidentally while quoting and writing. And this was indeed the case, as we see in Shaykh Tariq ibn Iwadallah's print, the Darul Asima print. There the word min comes. So the words come there as الفائدة الثالثة قال شيخ الإسلام من أوله من صنف. Shaykh Muhammad Awama also kept the word min in the text of Tadrib al-Rawi in his print. He claims that he found the word min in 5 manuscripts. If the word min is there, then it leaves room for there being others who wrote before Allāmah Rāma-Hurmuzi rahimahullah. However, Shaykh Muhammad Awama then points out that Allāmah Suyuti rahimahullah has mentioned in his other books that Allāmah Rāma-Hurmuzi rahimahullah was indeed the first to write in this field. For example, in his Itmām al-Dirāya li-Qurrā'i al-Nuqāya, he mentioned it like this here. ثم إن أول من صنف في هذا الفن القاضي أبو محمد الرامة-هرمزي. So you can see here he's saying ثم إن أول. He's not using the word min. He mentions it with absolute conviction that Allāmah Rāma-Hurmuzi rahimahullah was the first. He mentioned the same book he mentioned the same thing in another book of his, Al-Wasā'il bi-Musamara al-Awā'il. So if we consider those prints of Tadrib al-Rawi which has the word min, then we can say that he is quoting from Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, and therefore he used the word min, and in his other books he is writing his own opinion, and therefore he dropped off the word min. Otherwise, it would seem that Allāmah Suyuti rahimahullah first doubted whether Allāmah Rāma-Hurmuzi rahimahullah was the first, and therefore in Tadrib al-Rawi he brought the word min, but then he became convinced that Allāmah Rāma-Hurmuzi rahimahullah is actually the first, and therefore in his other books he dropped off the word min, and he mentioned that the first to write in this was Allāmah Rāma-Hurmuzi rahimahullah. For Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, it is the other way around. He probably first was convinced that Allāmah Rāma-Hurmuzi rahimahullah was the first to write, and later realized that there were others before him. So why do we say this? Because in Al-Mu'jam al-Mu'assas li-Mu'jam al-Mufahras in volume 1 on page 186, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah says that he read Al-Muhaddith al-Fasil to his teacher Shaykh Ibrahim al-Tanukhi, and thereafter he said, وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ كِتَابٍ صُنِّفَ فِي عُلُومِ الْحَدِيثِ فِي غَالِبِ الظَّنِّ. So you can see he's here mentioning that وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ كِتَاب, that this here is the first book. He's not saying min awwal al-kutub, He's not saying it is from amongst the first books, rather he's saying وَهُوَ أَوَّلُ kitab. So he mentioned that the book of Allāmah Hurmuzi rahimahullah was the first. He does not use the word min. Based on this, Haji al-Khalifa, the author of Kashf al-Dhunun, he quoted Hafiz ibn Ḥajar rahimahullah as saying, المحدث الفاصل بين الراوي والواعي للقاضي أبي محمد حسن بن عبد الرحمن بن خلاد الرامة هرمزي. So he says قال ابن حجر هو أول كتاب صنف في علوم الحديث. So he quotes Ibn Hajar rahimahullah saying that this here is the first book which was written. This book in which Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah mentioned that Allāmah Hurmuzi rahimahullah was the first, was written much earlier. So in these books, in this book, he was not particular to qualify his statement with the word min. Even though Nuzha was also written in 818 Hijri, I would assume that because the copy of Allāmah Akhsasi rahimahullah was read to the author 15 months before his demise, the ultimate view and the final opinion of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah is that Rāmah Hurmuzi rahimahullah was amongst the first and not the absolute first. Since we do not have the books of Imam Ali ibn al-Madini rahimahullah, and leave alone our era or the time of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, scholars who came long before Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah claimed that the books of Ali ibn al-Madini rahimahullah are extinct. It could be said that from what we have at our disposal, Allāmah Hurmuzi rahimahullah was the first to write in a comprehensive and encompassing way. But despite this here, Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah says, لَكِنَّهُ لَمْ يَسْتَوْعِبْ. So I just mentioned now that Allāmah Hurmuzi was the first to write in an encompassing way. But what Ibn Hajar is saying, he did not make it encompassing. It does not cover everything. So here we cannot help but wonder the motive behind the statement of Hafiz ibn Hajar rahimahullah. Is he giving a basic overview, or is he giving a critical assessment, a review and evaluation? What is his intent? If he wanted to justify why others can still write despite the existence of other writings, then he should not discredit those who did write. If he wants to mention the reason, maybe a flaw of the book, then he should give an interpretation, as it does for another scholar whose name he will cite last. You will see there he mentions a defect and thereafter he gives an interpretation. He mentions an excuse. So he should have done the same here. He shouldn't just leave it like that, لَكِنَّهُ لَمْ يَسْتَوْعِبْ, giving the reader the impression that the scholar didn't gather everything. So there are actually some answers here. Firstly, Al-Muhaddith Al-Fasil was not written for nomenclature or to define hadith terminology. Look at the full name of the book, Al-Muhaddith Al-Fasil Bayn Al-Rawi Wal-Wa'i. The title is enough to reveal that his main objective is to teach the etiquettes for a teacher and a student, how a teacher should narrate a hadith and how a student should take from the teacher. Hence, he discusses in this book the lofty status of those in the field of hadith, how a student should present himself, general etiquette, how to write wordings which should be used when transmitting, etc. So based on the name that he gave, whatever he mentioned is spot on. Then look at how he starts the book. He starts the book, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillah, wa la ilaha illallah, wa ala Muhammadin Nabiyillahi wa alihi salawatullah. Now look at his statements. He just mentions the praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and salutations upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And thereafter he says, اعترضت طائفة ممن يشنأ الحديث ويبغض أهله فقالوا بتنقص أصحاب الحديث والإزراء بهم وأسرفوا في ذنبهم والتقول عليهم. So he's mentioning that people are criticizing scholars of hadith. They are looking down upon this noble science. And they are going to extremes in condemning those who get involved in the science. And thereafter he says, وَقَدْ شَرَفَ اللَّهُ الْحَدِيثَ وَفَضَّلَ أَهْلَهُ وَأَعْلَى مَنْزِلَتَهُ. So he's mentioning now praises. So from this passage, it is clear that he did not even have it in the remotest part of his mind to write on nomenclature and laws regarding those terminologies. Undoubtedly, though, he does discuss a multitude of principles, but that was not his primary objective. So if his objective was not to define terminology, then how can he be criticized? How can a judgment like this be passed on his book? Otherwise, I can say the same about Imam Shafi'i's Risala. Imam Shafi'i raḥimahullah also did not mention all the laws. But the answer will then be given that Imam Shafi'i raḥimahullah did not intend to write on Ulūm al Ḥadīth. So the same answer has to be given for Allāmah raḥimahul-Muzi raḥimahullah, that Allāmah raḥimahul-Muzi raḥimahullah did not intend to write on Ulūm al Ḥadīth. You know, one of the mazaya, the specialities of this book, Nuzha, is that the author includes some usul al-fiqh. So if I say that he did not cover all the details of usul al-fiqh comprehensively, lam yastaw'ib, then the objection would be wrong, because his intention was not to write on usul al-fiqh. Rather, he is writing on usul al-hadith. So it is important to also understand that usul al-hadith developed gradually. As the centuries passed, it developed more. So even if Allāmah raḥimahul-Muzi rahimahullah did write on Ulūm al Ḥadīth, it will have to be judged according to the principles in his time. Did he encapsulate all the principles which were available in his times? Nevertheless, this was amongst the first books written. Allāmah Dhahabi rahimahullah says, وَمَا أَحْسَنَهُ مِنْ كِتَاب, what a brilliant book this is. He then says that Allāmah Silafi rahimahullah would always carry this book around because of the sheer love that he had for it. And as you can see, Allāmah Dhahabi rahimahullah also praised this book. One last point to note is that, interestingly, the author was more famously known for his expertise in lugha as opposed to hadith. So time is up. Inshallah, we will discuss the second book in the next lesson. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa